So transnational migration is movement by a person who moves back and forth between countries and forms a syncretistic identity. Uh, Ends up utilizing situational negotiation of identity. The example that I put here is the bracero laborers allowed to work in the United States and then go back on kind of uh, like work visa. This is the bracero program that was around kind of during World War II time period. Um, Again, people currently do this. A lot of nannies from other countries do this. I know of Filipino nannies that go to various Asian countries, do this for a time, then they go home. But they end up developing a certain level of syncretistic cultural behavior around those things, which is fascinating. Remittances, as a term, is a transfer of money from migrant back to family and home country. So this is basically just sending money home to your family if you live in a different location. Labor migrants are coming for work. This California, this tends to be one of those things that pops up. There's more jobs here, especially in agricultural, service, construction work. So a lot of times people do move from other countries to here. And it's not just that work. Sometimes there's labor migrants from places like India and China, East Asia, in terms of the high tech, and they're on kind of certain visas around those degrees and or fields of study. Circular migration is population movement between two or more places, and I guess this is more accurate when we talk about female domestic workers doing that circular migration where they're kind of going back and forth. Displaced persons, people forced to move. This is the push effect. Internally displaced persons would be forced to leave their home but stay within their country. This would be somebody maybe eminent domain and or evicted out of their home, displaced person. Refugee, internationally displaced person. So right now we have a lot of Syrian refugees out of the Syrian civil war. So this is important kind of terminology. Development, as a vocabulary term, is development-induced displacement. This has a lot to do with development itself, which is things like building new skyscrapers. So people displaced from development, like eminent domain, dam projects, building projects. What I did see that was fascinating when I was in Beijing, China, a couple years ago, there was an old village, like ancient village. You could tell that it has been there for a long time, hundreds, if not thousands of years. The houses looked kind of traditional style, but it was completely surrounded by factories, gigantic factories, and gigantic skyscrapers in a modern age. And what they decided to do was, and the way that they got the villagers to agree to the basically being displaced was when they built the skyscraper in that location, they were given a new apartment complex or a new apartment building or apartment condo per each family that was going to be displaced in this. So this is a little bit different in terms of how we kind of operate. A lot of times we just want to pay people cash, like, oh, here's your money, go on your way. In China, it was, no, you're going to have a place on the 13th floor, and so you're still kind of occupying a similar space to where your ancestors were. It's going to be very different because change happens, but this is a form of development-induced displacement. However, it's mitigating the displacement part. So this is fascinating as well. Resilience is the ability of the migrant population to bounce back, adapt, and overcome. Resiliency is a term that you probably hear all the time now. This is the idea that migrants may be fleeing persecution or coming or being pulled for greater opportunities. There is going to be culture shock, and it's not just a temporary culture shock like what we get through traveling. This is a huge culture shock because you're not home anymore. Your home is moved. So resiliency is kind of required in order to overcome that issue. Institutional migrants, people who move into social institutions, voluntary or involuntary. This is monks, nuns, elderly, prisoners, boarding school students, college students, and soldiers. So people that are moving to different locations, but they don't really have a say in it. New immigrants is a person who moved internationally since 1960s. Refugees, asylum seekers is another thing. Seeking asylum is that like the fear of persecution you going to other countries that would accept asylum seekers. People looking for economic opportunities is also part of this new immigrant movement since the 1960s. Anome is an important term. Durkheim gives us, Emil Durkheim gives us this term, and it's individuals' feeling of isolation and alienation due to breakdown in traditional values about identity, social relationships due to rapid social change. Boarding schools had this, a lot of students had this feeling of anime. Durkheim used it when analyzing society groups and looking at things like the issue of suicide. He was coming at it from a sociological perspective, which is if society starts breaking down those traditional values and identity and social connections, then anime, this feeling of brokenness in terms of disconnection and isolation, tends to come about. And resiliency is one of those avenues that you can tell people to kind of get over and move on. But these are emotional things that a lot of times people don't even know that they're going through until it really kind of comes to a head. Chain migration, first generation of migrants goes and then to a new location and then tells their friends and family that this is a good location, come move here and join us, right? One of the key things about migration I think that's important is we tend to politicize it a lot. What we need to realize is that migration has happened throughout history. The only reason why humans are all over the planet is because we've moved all over the planet. We were all migrants. Our whole history is full of migration. If you're looking at it from a physical anthropologist perspective, we all came out of Africa and started to move out hundreds of thousands of years ago, but we've occupied the whole space of the planet as migrants. To think that one person has a home and has been there forever is kind of not true. Now, are there people that have been there first and then other new migrants come and push them out? Yes, that's what happened with the Native Americans. That's called colonial displacement and imperial displacement, right? Different kind of topic, but again, forced migrations happened out of that, boarding schools, all these other things. But we need to understand that this idea, like we have this nationalistic view of migration and have these political kind of conversations around it. And really what we need to realize is that movement is one of our basic needs. And if a group, in a group, I mean culture group, societal group, if that's not working for us, historically as humans, we've moved. We moved to find different opportunities. And I'll give you a baseline example. Let's say that we're in a band group as a class, all 24 or 5 of us. Let's say that 5 people in that group just really don't get along. They have different views of things. And they decide, you know what, like there's a better place up the river, they're going to move to it. We would be okay with that. They would move up the river and they would be fine. This is just how human beings have operated. It might even be that they move further than the river because they're tired of the heat. So they want it colder, so they move up into the mountains further. This is just what humans do. What we've done is create national boundaries and borders that don't actually physically exist. We've created imaginary borders and basically said we don't want any more movement among different groups of people. This becomes kind of a human issue. It's not, we can think about it politically and the money and economics because that's what it always comes back to, it seems like, especially in the United States. But let's think about it as a human aspect. If I didn't like where I lived and was persecuted or there wasn't enough opportunity and my family was starving, do I just sit here and stay in this location and with my family and starve? Is that human? Is that resiliency? Is that adapting and overcoming? No, it's not. So changing that situation has always been part of what being human is. It takes a sense of adventure. It takes a sense of risk. So those are all kind of important aspects and concepts around that issue. So chain migration is one of those things. And I think that sometimes people talk about it as a political issue, but really it just kind of makes sense in a way. If I moved somewhere and it was amazing and I thought that it would fit my other family members and my family to move there and they would have a better life, of course I would tell them about that. It's not going to be my little secret, right? So these things are kind of very human, I would argue. And migration and movement are very human. Impacts and rights on migrants. Lifeboat mentality, this is another tough one that probably needs a little bit more explanation, is the view that seeks to limit growth of a particular group because there's a perceived resource constraint, which is jobs, food, or money. Lifeboat mentality can also be kind of used in terms of like the zero-sum game, which is, think of it as a pizza pie. And the view is that if I don't get that biggest piece of pizza, then somebody else is going to take it from me. And this is the same idea with lifeboat mentality: is the boat floats until one more person gets on and we sink, right? That's not actually the reality of things. We have plenty of arid land. We have plenty of space to grow food. If we as individual homeowners grew gardens, we'd be able to supplement a boatload of food. Again, there's ways that we can operate around this, but the lifeboat mentality has this kind of idea of this zero-sum game, which is jobs, food, and money will be taken from us. And in reality, especially as Americans, that we've always been told to do things like adapt and overcome, pull ourselves up from our bootstraps. If I'm threatened by somebody coming in and taking my job or food or money, then I need to get creative and take care of that. And it may be that I need to move. But again, these are all these ideas that come about and become very political. And I'm absolutely not trying to be political. We need to analyze this from a human anthropological aspect of things. We have to ask ourselves, are jobs really limited? We have 3.7% unemployment currently in the United States. People are quitting their jobs by the droves, almost faster than they have in a long time, in October and September. So, or September and August, I think I just read. So again, if people are quitting their jobs, then do we have a shortage of them? Most of the time people quit their jobs because they view that they can get themselves another job. 3.7% unemployment, by the way, is almost reaching full employment. And it's kind of just the overall carryover. Food, like I would argue, I don't know that there's a shortage of food in America. We talk about throwing away almost 60% of our food off the grocery store aisles. So if that's a concern, we have bigger issues, and it has more to do with efficiency and how the market system's working for us. Money itself, money is a symbolic kind of fallacy that we believe in. If we wanted to print more and jack up the inflation rates, then we can do that. So I don't know. A lot of these things have to do with this almost fallacy constraint that we've put on ourselves in terms of the societal structure that we've embedded into our own brains. And in reality, lifeboat mentality is one of those things where it causes a lot of political issues and creates a lot of kind of distance between individuals. But we have to view it on a human level. Always ask yourself, if I was put in this position, right? If I was born in a location that was going through civil war and my home was being blown up, would I just stick around and possibly risk my children's life? The answer is no. None of us are going to answer yes. So again, what do we do is the next question. But then how do we analyze that, right? And then how do people with empathy, we talked about last class in religion, how do people with empathy analyze that and kind of work that out in terms of accepting them in, or what is the policy that we create around that? Or again, now you guys are becoming experts on anthropology of policy. What does that look like? What does the language look like? Right of return, a refugee's right of entitlement to return to live in their homeland. So Syrian refugees currently, if the civil war stops and things get better, they would have a right to return to their homeland. It doesn't always happen because you become ingrained in terms of education and culture and all those other things start to take hold, but they would have that right. And it's been considered a basic human right according to the Magna Carta and the United Nations. So we're talking about 1215 AD. This has been kind of a right of return idea that we've had. All right, class, so that does it for week 13. Again, any questions on the research paper, you're definitely going to want to get to me. I am going to be kind of on the road, so hit or miss in terms of email I will definitely have. In terms of being on Canvas actively is going to be a harder thing to do for the next few days. I will be at a conference speaking this week, and the next week I will be at another conference. But anyway, any questions, comments, or concerns, please email me whenever you need to.